Good evening. Welcome to Defacto Review, our weekly in-depth analysis on the current news and affairs with our commentator and economist, Mr. Jargal Defacto.
Good evening.
And I'm your host, Namsret Singh. You can join in on our conversation on MNB World Facebook page and on Twitter with hashtag Jargal_Defacto. Now let's take a look at today's topics. Vision 2050 long-term policy approved. Will there be a private pension system? And for our last one, looking at the Constitutional Court ruling on Resolution 64 or the railway conspiracy. So let's take a look at our first topic for today. The Parliament of Mongolia approved the long-term development policy Vision 2050 this past Wednesday. Mongolia's long-term development policy has 9 fundamental goals and 50 objectives and will be carried out in the 3 phases until 2050. So our first question about this one is that you have written a series of critical reviews about each article of this policy document. So how do you feel about this document overall?
Well, this document is, in general, a good document. At least it specifies a description of what is to be done. There are 9 major goals, as you said, like national common values, human development, or middle class economics, good governance, green development, safety and security, or regional development, Ulaanbaatar and satellite cities. So these are 9 major goals they specify. But what is in general is like many other documents before, though it specifies 30 years ahead what is to be done by each 10 years, but it doesn't say very clearly how all this is achieved. So that was the whole idea of my book critique. This is in Mongolian, but it will be in English as well, where you can read what is to be really done to get this goal achieved. So, for example, it is, national common values. We talk about the government document talks about language, culture, history, and trust, belief, etc. What that all make us together as our common value of our nation. And in terms of human development, the Human Development Index will be at the level of 0.9, which is a quite high index, and Mongolia will be in the first 10 countries where the human development is achieved highest, etc., etc. The other thing is, for example, for the middle class, there will be 80% of Mongolians' population will be in this category by the year 2050. In terms of economics, it will be 6 times more than now, and it will be reached some $80 billion US, which makes the per capita GDP from current 4,000 to 15,000. That will bring us to the level of a country like Chile, Korea, etc. So in terms of good governance, for example, the government will be not only smart but also digital, green development, etc., etc. And as I said, I talked about what is to be done, and still it's missing how it is to be done. Who will do it? Private sector, government, what is the budget? So still these kind of things are missing.
So this document lays out the plan for the next 30 years of the country's development. So for something so significant, was it too rushed in a way? Or was there any enough public discussions about each article?
Well, compared with many other major documents, this document was relatively available for the public for the last 4 or so months, which is a quite good time. But I don't think the society, the public civic society had paid due attention, having more time to discuss many issues which is specified, not halfly or half reflected in this document. For example, as I said in this critique, I tried to the Defacto Institute tried to contribute towards a better dialogue and debate about some points, like, for example, this national identity, common identity of Mongolians are not only the language, culture, etc., but the very fact that we have a value of freedom. But we more pay attention to this freedom from what, but we don't pay attention, freedom from what we pay more attention, but don't pay attention much to freedom for what. And it comes with the responsibility in that part, for example, of our national common values to be discussed more. For example, we discussed on this middle class, what stops us to have a middle class developed is the clientelist structure of Mongolian political structure, for example. The economy, for example, whether we will reaching the level of current Chile, Poland, etc. It depends on a lot on how transparent is Mongolian governance, and of which unfortunately has a lot of corruption. And when we talk about the good governance, first of all, we talk about tackling the highest challenge we have, corruption. How do we face it? How do we solve the issues? And here in this critique, we try to increase the role of civic society, the participation of ordinary people in the decision-making process, and plus monitoring of what the government decision is, etc. And also about the regional and green development we have. For example, we could have discussions on, for example, on the issue around the tragedy of commons, which was addressed and kind of proposed a solution by Nobel laureate economist Ostrom about the common values sharing, responsibly sharing, etc., etc. Still, Mongolia could have, and I think still we have a chance to discuss more, even if it is approved, so that this is the case or the cause of every Mongolian family to discuss how and where we to get this goal. The final, my argument will be here. The policy of regional development. Up to now there were several attempts, almost 5 or 6 attempts to have regions developed by regional development policy, which could not implement because they are missing financial decentralization in the country. Budget is too much centralized. Election system is also not supporting regional development, and also the tax system of our municipalities, where if they had more economic freedom, financial freedom, they could have, for example, more muni bonds issued, which will be a substantial step towards making local infrastructure made, housing, etc. So these kind of issues, we could discuss it more, and hope still we can discuss it as a society.
So which of these many goals do you think that is most significant and should be completed by 2050?
Well, that's we also especially specified under the provision called human development. Because at the end, what is the development of a country? It's a development of human development. Each individuals of a country to be developed. In that sense, as we said, the book is saying that also in 30 years, Mongolia will have the Human Development Index at level of 0.9, which is today's level of Norway, Germany, or New Zealand. And then this is one of the best countries to live. Of course, that's we can dream, but we need to do a lot. As Amartya Sen said, the economist said, Nobel laureate, also another Nobel laureate said that, the poverty is not coming because there is no money, but also it is coming, even with the money, because there is no capabilities of poor people to make values in life and sell it. So Amartya Sen put the basis of the UN Human Development Indexes, which is consisting of figures like average expectation, life expectations, and how many expected years of schooling, and then what is the mean years of schooling, then the per capita national income, and out of these three figures they made this Human Development Index, which was at the level of 0.58 in 1990 in Mongolia, and it was 2018, after 28 years, 0.73. Though the government made decision once that by 2020 it will be 0.83, which of course we have not achieved, and no government, for example, made any accountability for not achieving. And so this is a clear example where the government sometimes make too much dream list, and even they don't bother to implement those dream lists.
Hey, thank you for that. Even though we have lots to discuss on this one, we have to get to our next topic. So on Wednesday, several parliament members, led by the Member of the Parliament Ochral, submitted a bill on private pensions. The bill would create a legal environment for private pension system, and additionally, this would be the first step towards creating a multi-layer pension system in Mongolia. So our first question about this one is that has there been anything like this? Has there been any legislation similar to this before?
Well, first of all, what is a Mongolian pension system? The first law was made in 1958. See, in that time, the law was saying, which was valid for another 30 or so years, it was if one is to work not less than 25 years, then at the age, if man 60 years old, woman 55 years old, they will get pension money. And this law was working, as I said, for 30 years. But in 1958, average age of Mongolians were 59 years old. Today, for men is 69, woman is 79. This average medium life expectancy changed, and we have, of course, better living standard. That's why people live longer, and plus there is inflation. So this pension system really, in fact, doesn't work. Also because it was a part of budget before for many years, and there were certain cases. I remember the trade union activists were fighting with the government and to force them to specify certain amounts of the government debt to the pension fund, which is running today with the loss. Somehow there are five general the social insurance fund in the country, like healthcare and like jobless, etc. But out of this five, only the pension fund has a loss for many years, and they try to keep that loss at the level of 2% of GDP a year, which shows how big deficit the fund has. And you know, in late 90s, they tried to change a reform where they suggested people who are born after 1960 will have a personal account from which they will be paid later on, and those who was born before that will be receiving this through the same system which was working before. And it is a pay and go system like in many countries. But however, it didn't work because if they were receiving a pension now, they would receive much less money than it would go otherwise. So what is happening today is that people really receive the pension. The people receiving is even less than the minimum income specified in the law in the country.
So what are the pros and cons if this private pension bill is approved and in effect?
This is a quite progressive pension, and that's, I think, reflecting best cases of some other countries where the system is now, you know, you pay, and out of those paid, you will receive somehow, they receive their money, definitely that money back, even with a certain interest rate, which is needed. According to this new legislation, out of 17% that we pay for pension today, currently every employee pays, then 4% out of the 17 will be specially gone to the central accumulation provident account on your name, and then after certain years, after 30 years work, you will be able to receive some 77 million tugriks total, and you can receive it month by month, 777,000 tugrik per month, which is, I mean, with compared to today's level, is a good income and nothing to compare with the current pension system. As I said, minimum wage in this country is 420,000 tugrik this year. It was last year 320 tugriks. By the demand of the trade union, they have put a certain level of inflation index on that, and they keep increasing minimum wage every year. And this way, the pension fund, pension money that on the average 80% of Mongolians who receive pension is only 280,000 tugriks, which is a way less than even this minimum level of living in a country. So really it requires in one or another form complete pension reform, and which was a good, I think, start, the legislation proposed by Parliament member Jargal and other 4 members.
So previously you've written about Singapore's social insurance tax system. So are there any parts of the system that can be implemented in Mongolian environment?
You can read details or full articles in here, because I wrote 2 articles about Singapore housing. It's the only country where everybody has a house, unique. I mean, even the youngster, just you start jobs and you will be able to receive jobs. I mean, apartments, maybe 1-room studio, but everybody has a studio, or I mean, apartments with all this comfort, water, bath, etc. As soon as you have any account, personal account in Singapore, every who is working has some account with that account. Even you just started the jobs, you still receive apartments. How is it done? Is it done very smart way? And I think that's why a lot of things to take from this country, small country, though the size of Ulaanbaatar, but still this country has such a smart system, and that the whole money, for example, we pay to our social insurance system just categorized into 3 accounts. One is just a healthcare account, the other is a simple account, compound accounts, so there are 3 accounts, and all out of these 2 accounts you receive money and plus state assistance in case when you purchase first apartment. And also if you get married, then you have more money from the state. If you have a child, also more. Even there is a law called proximity discount, which says that if, because it's an aging population, every 2 person lives to the 80 years old. Every 3rd person lives to the year of 90. So it's a very aging population. So not to move that taking care of senior people, they have a kind of proximity discount, which specifies that if you live closer to your parents, you have a discount. If you live with your parents, even more discount, so that the housing conditions, having all these considerations. And I think Mongolians have a lot of things to learn from the Central Provident Fund of Singapore. Mongolian governments, I remember maybe 5 times or so, visited the Singapore Provision Fund and other Temasek Fund, etc., etc. They visit and they come back and they are replaced, unfortunately, and usually that learning experience are staying with few bureaucrats who is usually are changed after the election. That's not a good thing.
Okay, thank you for that. Now let's get into our 3rd topic for today. The Constitutional Court of Mongolia discussed whether or not the parliament violated the constitution when approving Resolution 64 on railroad transportation policy. The court decided that the resolution violated the 2nd part of the 1st article of the Constitution, which states the fundamental purpose of the state activity is the insurance of democracy, justice, freedom, equality, national unity, and respect for the law. So our first question is that Do you think that there is any validity behind this accusation? Did the Constitutional Court of Mongolia really violated the constitution itself?
Well, this last decision of the last session of the last parliament before election caused a real big issue in the country, and now people are not completely understood what had happened, but we tried to highlight what exactly happened last week. Very strange thing had happened, because Constitutional Court, upon the request of one citizen, Mr. Norov Sambu Otang Jargal. I learned the name somehow through various other channels, which were not reported in all these documents, though all this kind of constitutional documents should be public before even discussions, but they have not bothered themselves to inform who had requested, but this is a one person had requested, saying that they have violated constitutions. We talk about this resolution number 64 of the great Horal, great state Horal, which says that the railroad gauge to Chinese border, in short, to the export from the mines can be of a narrow gauge. And suddenly the Constitutional Court, very strange, on the meeting on May 13th, in the morning they discussed and they found this violation of institutions, violation of constitutions, and the same day, after a few hours, state structure, standing committee had supported that motion, which was approved next day by the general session of the parliament. Within 24 hours, this articulated decisions was made. And since I'm not a lawyer, but a lawyer, Dr. Bembajov said that this is a clear violation of the constitution, this decisions, and this decision is made by the requests of whom we have no doubt who is that person. That's what this lawyer is writing. In general, this is a quite, this decision completely changed the concept of railroad network development of Mongolia, proposing basically, bluntly, that all Mongolian railroads will be only of a wide gauge of Russia. And under that decision of 64, resolution number 64 of Parliament from 2014, included the possibility of having a Chinese or international gauge, which is 85 millimeter narrower than a Russian gauge, which is international gauge, which was supposed to help us to have cheaper transport of coal all the way to China in the Chinese eastern coast area, where the final consumers of Mongolian coke and coal are. And then finally we will make this railway with a narrow gauge, which is not going to happen anymore. And also it turned out that project is already being implemented by a company that was not transparent. It was a decision by the State National Security Council again, and they have, without any tender, had given their permission to a company called Buddy International, a part of Qalamta Bank, and people now asking, where is this tender? Where is this glass count, etc. So down the road, it looks like will cause more questions than answers.
So there have been many similar accusations made before. So how do we change this? How do we, avoid being accused of something like
looks
this?
Like it's this Constitutional Court decisions are beyond public knowledge, beyond public will, according to another jurist, Dr. Mukh Saikhan, who said that that's the habits of this Constitutional Court of Mongolia, which always supports political decisions, whatever it's wrong or good. Anyway, they are kind of an extension of their hands, according to Mr. Mukh Saikhan, who says that, who proves that the same the Constitutional Court of Mongolia made the same decisions on the two different issues of the size of constituency and the way of election for majoritarian or proportional, and on the same issue they made on two different solutions they made the same decision, saying that this is violating the constitution. So in short, according to Mr. Mung Sakhang and many other lawyers, Constitutional Court serves not the public but only politicians, and I don't think there will be people who can control that Constitutional Court, which is nominated or approved by the parliament. That was mostly suggested by in particular the current composition of the Constitutional Courts were nominated by the president, the previous one and the current one.
So can this be, maybe fixed by more transparency?
It must be, because democracy in the governance is always, we need more transparency of decision making, and that's the strength of democracy, which unfortunately is not supported by Mongolian government and the high-ranking officials in the country, according to the lawyers.
So whose interests are violated by Resolution 64? What caused the Constitutional Court of Mongolia to start this investigation?
That's actually a question, because when we have now only a wide gauge of railways from Tavantolga coal mine to Chinese border, which we're expecting to be only narrow, which will make the transportation more smooth, no changing the wheel, etc. And now with the current decisions, they will change, and it will be more cost for Mongolia for export to our coal. Originally, the idea was to have all roads coming from China to our deposits and to be narrow gauge, because we are exporting all our products to China. But now, unless this is the case, and it serves more Russian interests than Mongolian interests, because according to many people, it is so because Russia turned out more competitor for us in terms of exporting coal, because Russia has 17% of the world coal reserve, 40% of natural gas, and in terms of coking coal, and by the way, they coking coal export to China in the 1st February of this 2020 have increased 30% at the same time for the first 2 months of this year. Year-on-year base, Mongolian export decreased 30%. And plus now with these new decisions, our export will be more again expensive, and it will be less competitive with Russian coal. That's what it's about.
So does the Russian railroad have a wide gauge or narrow gauge?
Of course, Russia is the only country in the world the Soviet Union has a wider gauge, which is 85 millimeters wider than international or Chinese or other countries. And that's why it makes very bottleneck at the border of the former Soviet Union. And only 2 other countries other than the Soviet Union has this wide gauge, has a wide gauge. Finland, which was a part of Tsarist Russia colony, and Mongolia, which was a part of a Soviet Union colony. So Finland has changed it. They had dual railroads. They can immediately switch with the Swedish railroad. Swedish cars can go straight to Finland. Meanwhile, Mongolia had not succeeded. And we were thinking, we had 20 or so years discussions, 10 years of fight, and finally the 2014 decision was made, which was cancelled by this decision. So it's up to you to see for whose interest all this is.
Okay. Thank you for that. Now, unfortunately, that is all the time we had for today. Thank you for staying with us. We will see you next week.
Thank you very much.